Love bites. I knew she was the one from the moment I laid eyes on her. She was small, with dark hair that flowed past her waist. When she turned her green eyes on me, I felt as though she could see every secret, as if she knew me better than I knew myself. I asked her if she'd like to get a coffee. She said yes. Simple as that. Things moved quickly between us. A part of me wanted to just let go and bask in the glory of our love, but another part held back. I really loved her, you see. And with every kiss, every surprise gift, every murmured, "I love you," I was getting closer to the precipice. I am not what I appear to be. I would have to tell her eventually, I knew, but then she'd turn away from me. Flee, if she was smart, which she was. I couldn't give myself to her fully without losing her. Little did I know that she held her own secrets. It was a Saturday night. We cuddled on the couch, watching her favorite horror flick. Somewhere around the second murder, I started to drift off. Not uncommon, due to my strange work schedule. Usually, she'd shake me awake when the credits rolled, tease me for sleeping through the best part, and lead me by the hand to our bedroom. This time, my wake-up call wasn't so gentle. My first sensation was pain, piercing, concentrated pain in my neck. It lasted only a moment before I felt soft lips against the wound. My eyes fluttered open as blood gushed, and I looked down, confused. My girlfriend sat cold beside me, hungrily consuming my blood. Terror filled me, and I pushed her off. Cheyenne, no. But it was too late. Blood trickled down her chin as she began to gag, her alabaster skin turning gray, the veins beneath blackening. I held her face in my hands, tears streaming down my face as she looked at me in horror. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered as she began to convulse, her eyes rolling up into her head. A few moments later, she lay still, and her body began to dissolve. I was left with ashes in my hands and tears on my cheeks. This was all my fault. I should have warned her. You see, vampires can only feed from the living. Vampires will never hurt you. Mama, the feeble voice said from the other side of the door. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Mama, please. It's so cold out here. I'm sorry, baby. I sobbed through clenched teeth. You know Mama can't let you in. I know how he must be feeling. My poor son. Out there, cold, all alone. I couldn't let him in though. I couldn't take that chance. One of us had to survive. This goddamn curse had taken so much already. I couldn't let our family's last hope die out with it. I'm so hungry, he said again. There was a feeble knock on the door, but the deadbolt more than held against it. I had made sure he couldn't get in before night fell. I had prepared for every possible eventuality. There was garlic hanging on the windows, blocking anything from going through. Multiple wooden stakes lay on the ground next to me, ready to pierce any heart that could possibly need it. We had never been a religious family, so crosses and holy water were nowhere to be found, but I took what I could get. I heard him slump against the door, sliding down to a sitting position. He must be getting hungry by now, all this time out there on his own. I was just trying to protect him. To protect my baby boy. But that was then. Now is just survival. I'm sorry, Mama, he said, his voice hollow, almost choking. I should have listened to you. I should have done what you asked. It's okay, baby. I choked back tears, moving my hand over to one of the stakes and clutching it close to my chest. It's not your fault. I should never have put that burden on you. You were too young, too innocent. I can still help, Mama. He replied, a steadiness in his voice now. A resolve. Just let me in, Mama. I can help the pain go away. God, he sounded so grown up almost. I suppose trauma does that, makes us grow before our time. Maybe he could help. Maybe he knew something I didn't. Let him in. That damned voice again. I know it's all a trick they play, but just seeing him couldn't hurt. All right, baby, I'm gonna open the door. You stand back, okay? I shouted through to him. Moonlight poured through the window as I clutched the stake closer, sliding deadbolts to the side and unlocking the heavy door. It barely had time to swing open before I saw him. My baby boy, dirtier and thinner than when I had last saw him, but my boy all the same. No older than 10. I ran to him. He was crying. He needed me. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry I left that night. I'm sorry you had to come after me, he said, raising the stake to my heart as I ran into him. I felt it pierce me. You can rest now, Mama. I love you. Kindness in need. Paul Turner moved to a small rural town named Beaconsdale to get away from the noise of the city. He found a nice house with cheap rent that gave a great view of the neighborhood. When he settled in, it turned out the place was as peaceful and comfortable as he had hoped it would be. The only problem was the strict curfew in this town, but he managed to get used to it. One cold night, he was looking at the town through his window. The town didn't have any street lamps, but the moon was out tonight. The streets were empty as usual, except for someone walking across the sidewalk, breaking curfew. It looked like a young girl wearing an old dress. She went from door to door, pleading for help, but no one answered. She was either lost or homeless and needed shelter. As Paul kept watching, he was starting to feel bad for her, but he thought one of his neighbors would take her in. No one did though, and she ended up disappearing into the night. Paul had trouble sleeping that night, feeling worried about the girl and hoping she was okay. He would ask around about her tomorrow. The next morning, Paul talked with his neighbors in the town store about the girl, but every time he mentioned her, they either avoided the conversation or said they were in a hurry and walked away. He tried to ask the landlord about the girl, but all he said was to keep quiet about it. The police weren't helping him either. Paul was confused. They're usually friendly people, yet for some reason, they won't help a homeless child out in the cold. He decided to take matters into his own hands. When the girl came back, he pointed his flashlight at her through the window to get her attention. When he saw her coming towards him, he opened the door to invite her in. There she stood in front of the house, with long brown hair and brown eyes, and a dress that was dirty with holes in them, waiting with anticipation. "Would you like to come in?" he said with a welcoming smile. The girl immediately smiled back, beaming with hope and gratitude, before she entered without hesitation. She saw that Paul had prepared some new clothes and blankets that he bought from the store. He offered to let her sleep on the couch before taking her to the city to find people who help homeless children. He then asked what she wanted to eat. She just stood there for a moment, looking at all of her gifts, before slowly turning around. Her eyes were now blood red, their pupils shrunk into tiny, terrifying beads. She then showed him her vampiric teeth. Paul stood back, frozen in fear. He just realized what he had just done. The neighbors closed their windows and curtains as they heard Paul scream. I regret turning an Instagram/TikTok influencer into a vampire. I regret turning an Instagram influencer into a vampire. And I guess she dazzled me with her pictures and videos. It's the way she earned a living, through every aspect of social media, and I just had to get her into my clan. I saw her walking alone, but taking pictures of herself one night time. And she was afraid of me at first, but I reassured her that I was not going to hurt her. You see, I ask people's permission whether or not they want to be vampires, and I don't just take them. She told me that she had to think about it, and after a couple of days, she was so excited to become a vampire. I didn't turn her straight away, and I gave her a couple of months to get her humanly affairs in order, and she was all over social media like Instagram and TikTok, promising her followers that she has a surprise for them. I was so happy for her, and I couldn't wait to have her into my clan. She was amazing, and I envisioned her to be a great vampire who would one day become very respected and feared by every vampire in the world. Turning someone into a vampire is no small business, and it is a big responsibility. It's similar to bringing a baby into the world. When I turned her, there was a bit of a struggle, but she calmed into it, and then she drank my blood. Before you know it, she was floating through the air, and she grasped her vampiric powers very easily. She kept asking us to take pictures of her when she was flying through the air or when she used her mind powers on humans. I took the pictures awkwardly, and when she looked at them, she shouted at me for not taking the right pictures. I did take the picture, but vampires don't have reflections, I told her, and everything became awkward. I realized that she hadn't thought through everything. She started having a panic attack, and she blurted, "What about my Instagram, TikTok, and followers? I make my living through pictures and videos." And tears of blood started rolling down her eyes. She has become so depressed, and she started suffering withdrawal symptoms from lack of social media. She isn't drinking blood, and she keeps trying to go into the sunlight. What a great disappointment. The Adventures of Amicus Bellator, the Pale Vampire. As midnight descends upon my city like a bird of prey, the streets and alleys become bathed in darkness, tainted only by man-made fluorescent pretenses. Camouflaged by Stygian cloaks, the monsters come out to play, drunk with the aroma of fresh meat and fear that wafts into their demented nostrils like blood in the open sea. Such is my element. I rise from my coffin to absorb what the new night has to offer and sense a girl, a cute little thing, round 8 or 9 years old. I pursue her scent. Just because I'm immortal doesn't mean I don't value youth. I forge my way through the familiar shades of black and shadow, occasionally passing mortals who dare walk the streets of perdition tonight. Freak, clown face, hey dummy, where's your ventriloquist? I've heard all the jeers. To be frank, they sting. And it's true, my appearance isn't quite normal. Even among my kind, I wear a very unique set of features. Some do not care for them, but I've accepted the mutilations. Even my brethren have rejected me, claiming that I should be ashamed of what I do in the secrecy of nightfall. Just because I don't have a ticking heart doesn't mean I don't feel. After passing the licentious nightclubs and disease-ridden hotels downtown, I soon arrive at an abandoned housing project. The ramshackle apartment building is void of tenants, but I smell human in the air. I'm excited. My life fails to provide me with very much pleasure, but exercising my skills does award me an intense high. I rear my pale skull back and gulp in the night air, wishing for a moment that I could know the taste of oxygen once more. Breathing for me now is nothing more than a bodily function that I occasionally force upon myself when it behooves me to blend in. My undead senses focus in past the dilapidated brick walls, locating the young girl. On this night, whether she knows it or not, she is prey for a monster. I lick my decayed lips and run my clawed fingers through the wispy remnants of my hair, anticipating the succulent orgasm of death that I'll soon provide to a mortal. She screams pathetically. Indeed, she does know that she is being preyed upon. With hushed footsteps, I hurry myself to the bushes where the little girl lays, bloody and bruised. I stealthily protract my arms, gripping the neck of the young mortal stooping in front of me. A depraved weasel of a man, a child murderer. As he chokes and gags, spitting feeble vileness, I simply watch with silent pleasure, waiting for him to expire. He's young, maybe 20, but plenty old enough to know better. My tear ducts having long since dried away, I dispense nothing but impotent sympathy as I hold the little girl's limp, broken body. My cold hands tremble angrily, knowing I have the power to bring her back. But she would only suffer more. Just because I don't have a soul doesn't mean I'm the monster. I recently discovered that my blood has rare antibodies. I recently decided to donate blood, as some of my friends had been doing it for years, and I felt a bit guilty about being so lazy. It honestly felt like a no-brainer, as I know that it could save someone's life. I got to the blood drive, and they asked me a bunch of questions to make sure I was okay to donate. It took a while, but finally they extracted my blood. I felt a bit dizzy afterwards, so they made me stay for a while to make sure I was okay. A couple of days later, I got a call from the local hospital asking if I was willing to come in to talk. When I arrived at the hospital, they ushered me into a room with a couple of doctors. The doctors explained to me that I have a very rare blood type. There is antibodies in it that could help save children's lives. I agreed to give blood more regularly and had to sign a number of forms. They thanked me profusely as I was leaving, as this would make a lot of people happy. I showed up to my first appointment and was surprised as it was at a fairly remote building. I was led inside to a waiting room and told to take a seat. A couple of minutes later, a young doctor came in and led me to an office. He was pointing out something in the corner of the room when I felt a needle being poked into my arm. I instantly felt dizzy and collapsed to the ground. The next thing I remember is waking up in a room surrounded by doctors and nurses. I could see tubes poking out of me that seemed to be draining my blood. I watched them smile as they each began drinking my blood. I begged them to kill me, but they just laughed and told me that they would be keeping me alive indefinitely. My blood type can save children's lives, but unfortunately for me, it is also an aphrodisiac for vampires. I was visited by a vampire every night, between the ages of 8 and 12. I don't know what you think you know about vampires, but I bet it's mostly bullshit. My vampire was small, strangely ageless, and wore simple things like t-shirts and slacks. Their gender was unclear to me, but it somehow seemed to veer towards female, so I'll refer to her as she. She made no sound at all, except for when she spoke, which was seldom. She'd pass straight through my wall as if it weren't there. She glided gracefully, like a kite that escaped. Before started to feed, she'd swirl above me 4 or 5 times, like a dog before it sits. I'd be paralyzed all the while, from the neck down. I couldn't even breathe, though through some foul magic, she'd keep me alive all night. She'd drink blood from my finger or sometimes my wrist, but never the neck. It felt a little like a nettle sting. Then she'd sit on the end of my bed for the longest time, like a gargoyle in the dark. Then she'd feed again. Then she'd leave until the next night. Most girls would scream the house down, but not me. I'd learned from a very young age that my mama never came running when I cried. My mama never came running at all. She hated me, always had, blamed me for driving my daddy away. I did tell mama about my vampire, just once. And do you know what she said? Good. Then she turned back to the television and swigged some more whiskey, mixed with Vicodin. Soon, I became less afraid of my vampire. I guess it became sorta normal. She only took a little blood each night, which made me even paler and weaker than I'd been previously, and I was always sickly from malnutrition. But no one noticed any change in me. No one really noticed me at all. She must have taken a shine to me for about 6 months in, she said, that as a special favor. Since my blood tasted the very best she'd ever drank, I could ask her one question every year on my birthday. She told me that vampires know everything and always tell the truth. So I racked my young brains, and when my 9th birthday arrived, I asked her why she'd chosen me. Because you're the sort of person who is totally alone, she answered. Nobody will ever help you when you speak of me. On my 10th birthday, I asked her if she'd stop visiting me. Hopefully, she answered. On my 11th, I asked her name. A waste of a question, I guess, but I was dying to know. I never had one, she answered. On my 12th birthday, I lay dying. I'd swapped my Tic Tacs for my mama's Vicodin. My words were slurred when my vampire arrived. Is there an afterlife? I asked. For your mama, maybe, but not for us. And she showed me, in a mirror, my first set of fangs. I'd never seen my own smile before. LAPD, open up. I'd fallen asleep on the couch again. I didn't appreciate the sudden interruption, and I doubly didn't appreciate the first 4 letters it began with. Even though I didn't remember doing anything wrong, cop still filled me with dread. Bang, bang, bang. I staggered to the door and unlocked it. There he was. One cop, tall, thin, pale, and blonde. Can I help you, officer? We're looking for a suspect in your neighborhood, he said. May I come in? I blinked. This suspect isn't in here, I said. I didn't imply they were "I'd just like to ask you some questions," he said. "You can ask from here." He sighed and pulled out a notepad and pen. He asked what I'd been doing for the last 2 hours. I told him I drifted off while watching some horror movie and was fast asleep until he pounded on my door. "You're sure you didn't hear anything at all?" he asked. "Positive." He fidgeted, staring past me into my apartment. "I'd really like to ask you some questions inside," he said. "Sir, unless you have a warrant," I said, "you can't come in." "I know my rights. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm just not comfortable inviting people I don't know into my home, even if they are a cop." "What if I have probable cause? Because I can see that you have marijuana on your coffee table," he asked. I looked over my shoulder. There was, in fact, a pipe on my coffee table. "Then I would remind you that it's 2021 and weed is legal in California," I said. Frustrated, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. "Last question. Have you seen this woman?" I squinted. She did seem awfully familiar. Her eyes were so dark, it was almost like she had no sclera at all, and her messy hair seemed to envelop her narrow shoulders. Though it was merely a photograph, it was like she was looking at me, sizing me up from her little paper prison. I reached for the photo to take a closer look, and that's when he grabbed my arm. His fingers were cold and strong, and I noticed for the first time that each one ended in a sharp nail. They dug into my skin, pricking 5 points of blood. I yanked back with everything I had, stumbling into my apartment. He stumbled, too, but when he hit the threshold, it was like some invisible force knocked him back. He hissed, showing off glinting fangs. "Of course. Cops, vampires, both need some kind of invitation." He composed himself. "That'll be all. Have a good evening." He walked quickly away from my apartment. I noticed he did not seem to have a patrol car. He was, however, making his way down my block. I rushed to find my phone. My neighbor, Linda. She's got a doormat that says, "Come on in." Vlad spent 2017 traveling throughout the American Northeast, searching for a home in which to stake his claim and build his American dream. He found a perfect candidate in the blue-collar town of Transylvania, New Hampshire. There, he envisioned a parasitic campaign to suck every last drop of blood from the town. Vlad manifested a scheme with a local physician, Dr. Shalagi, in which Dr. Shalagi would overprescribe oxycodone to patients suffering from pain brought on by manual labor. Whenever the doctor grew concerned with a patient's growing addiction to opiates, she would ostensibly cut off the patient from oxycodone and then, for a kickback payment, refer the patient to Vlad for further prescription fulfillment. And once Vlad and his minion parasitic dealers introduced heroin to these initial desperate patients, the fate of Transylvania, New Hampshire, was sealed. Together, Vlad and Dr. Shalagi turned Transylvania, New Hampshire, from a bustling blue-collar city into their own ghastly opium den, a hitter filled with soulless eyes, terminated jobs, desperation, broken families, abandoned children, and lost hope. As a result, the property value of Transylvania, New Hampshire plummeted, which attracted the attention of real estate company Nosferatu Properties. The CEO of Nosferatu Properties met with Vlad and Dr. Ziligi. "I seek to build New Hampshire's most gutty, not-for-profit drug rehabilitation center here in this town. The CEO of Nosferatu Properties expressed. However, drug rehab centers need patience, which is why I've approached you too. Dr. Shalagi, if you can expand your private practice beyond the town of Transylvania and recruit more doctors. And Vlad, if you could cut your heroin with more fentanyl, enough to make people zombies, but not kill them, then I will award you both significant stakes in Castle Rehab Facility. Vlad and Dr. Shalagi agreed to the venture, and that night, all three celebrated their new business deal with bottles of spiked blood. Vampires had once again struck gold in America. Silver is a vampire. We, the kids in North Haven, are sure of it. The pale girl that had moved from Blackside City with her parents is really suspicious. First off, she talks to no one, and she rarely smiles. However, Josh told us that he knew why she never smiles. She has super sharp teeth, he saw it. That's the reason she keeps her mouth shut, otherwise everyone could see it. Second, the moment she showed up in town, cattle would be found dead or bleating out. The farmers claimed it was a wolf or a bear, but we all know better. Silver did it. Of course you can't see her red eyes, but she has contact lenses that hide her real eyes. We saw it. When we peeked at her in the bathroom, we saw her take out those lenses. But that's not even the biggest piece of evidence. No, we spend entire nights outside her house to study her. Sometimes, Silver leaves the house in the middle of the night, and when she comes back, she's covered in blood. And wouldn't you know it, the next morning, they found a sheep lying in a pool of blood. That's when Josh, Sammy, and I decided to take action. Sammy brought wooden stakes to pierce her heart, while Josh and I had brought garlic and holy crosses. When both her parents went away for date night, we snuck into her house. Johnny was nervous, but Sammy and I were brave and took the lead. We quickly found our vampire sleeping in her bed. The room was completely dark, the perfect lair for a vampire. We sneaked our way towards her bed until Johnny gulped too loud as Silver woke up and stared at us. I lowered my stake intending to strike the vampire's heart, but she deflected it. Garlic, I yelled as Sammy stumbled with the garlic. Johnny grabbed one of the crosses and held it in front of us. Checkmate. Silver stared at the cross in Johnny's hand. Was that disbelief on her face? Fear. It was really hard to see in the dark. She started suddenly screaming in pain. Her body started quivering, and I could see fear on her face. Holy shit, Sammy gasped. She really is. Die, you vampire, I yelled. My stake swung down and was about to hit her in the heart. But last moment, it was cut by a hairy paw. I stared at the Silver in confusion, which only grew even more when Silver began to growl at us. What the? I tried to say, but before I could finish the sentence, she jumped towards my throat. As she passed the moonlight that shone through the window, I no longer saw a girl. Instead, I saw a wolf. We woke up one morning to find that we could no longer drink. It was literally as simple as that. After thousands of years of evolution, suddenly humanity was no longer able to survive on any of the liquids that had previously sustained us. For those who dared to attempt, it was like drinking battery acid. It was a mess. It was a waste. Scientists worked themselves into a frenzy, desperately trying to find the reason why water suddenly was unable to be consumed by humans. This research dominated them for the first day. Animals had no ill effects, and showers and rain water were fine to touch, just not to drink. The next day, the research went further. Volunteers were asked to try different concoctions of existing liquids, from everything to apple juice to seawater, just to see if there was something that could help us out, at least for a moment. At the morning of the third day, with humanity at its peak of desperation, and after a terrified scientist bit his co-worker, the discovery was made. Blood was fine. Human blood would keep you alive, with no negative side effects whatsoever, but it had to be human though, as you couldn't cheat with that animal blood nonsense. The hospitals were overwhelmed as blood bags were immediately emptied, mostly by the hospital staff, who insisted that they needed it most. Blood banks were broken into. Those were the people I think were perhaps the most decent of us. I'm ashamed to say, at that point of desperation, after nearly 3 full days without a single drop of water, a lot of people reacted with violence. There is no telling how many people died that first day, as they were drained solely for that human desire to remain alive. What they didn't expect was that human blood tasted amazing. The government tried to help, to try to keep order. Mandatory blood donations were ordered for every human being on the planet. The promise was that humanity would keep itself going, through ongoing sacrifice and support, until we figured out how to reverse this problem. But what really happened was people grew impatient. A pint a day was never going to be enough when it was so damn addictive. Prisoners and lawbreakers were offered to service the rest of humanity, and the homeless population found themselves vanishing overnight. But it didn't stop there. It's amazing how fast humanity can act when they all have the same need. Soon society had all but broken down, as humanity would travel together in smaller and smaller groups, solely to find other humans to drain. It was a battle for survival, a battle where people were constantly in need for that next fix, where nobody could be trusted. We fought and consumed our way down, further and further, until here I am. Through sheer luck, as far as I know, I'm the last. Funny how things can change in just 3 months.
People call us vampires, but we're so much more than just some horror movie monster. We're people too, man. Just, a little different. I mean, we need jobs just like everyone else. Most people think we live on the streets or in tunnels or some shit, and the only money we have is what we steal from victims. Man, I don't even steal from my victims. Bad enough, I'm taking their lives, why an insult to injury. We live in apartments and houses, same as you. So we gotta work. But do you know how hard it is to find a night job that pays enough for rent? So, yeah, some of us sell drugs on the side. Never anything hard like meth or heroin. We're not looking to kill clients. Not with drugs anyway. Relax, that was a joke. But really, if it makes you feel any better, I personally try not to kill my customers. Bad for business, But weed and pot don't kill you, right? Stuff's harmless enough. But it's still illegal, most places, and you'd have to be a friggin' moron to buy drugs in broad daylight. So think about it, this is the perfect gig for vampires. And yeah, okay, sure, if a deal goes south or a vamp's feeling particularly ravenous, they might get their teeth out. But whoever said buying drugs was safe? Hey, calm down. Yes, many of us are insatiable. And no, we can't eat human food. Except maybe long pig. Get it? No? Screw you. But just like you, we gotta eat. Gotta work and gotta eat. See? Not so different. But we've got self-control. Ever seen a fat vampire? Didn't think so. Granted, we do get hungry a lot, and sometimes we'll have to help a famished friend hunt for a late-night snack. It's like how you might get your drunk friend some McDonald's or something. Yeah, it's exactly like that. And hey, eyes on me. You never guess it, but some of us are artists. I'm talking honest to Satan monets. And shit, you might even know a few. So don't be so quick to judge, okay? But yeah, some of us less talented schmucks turn to dealing. But nevertheless, all of us, every vampire under the moon, we never discriminate against our own. We stick together, always ready to help each other out. If there's one major difference between humans and vampires, it's that you won't find the same camaraderie among humans that you will with us. And for Lucifer's sake, would you relax? I already told you, I don't kill my customers. Not me. Anyway, you gonna keep staring at my friend over there, or are you gonna buy some friggin' pot?
I stared at the patient's chart. He had been an organ donor, and we needed to know his blood type, in addition to other details, to avoid rejection by a healthy host. I don't let sleeping dogs lie. I needed to know the type. To summarize, some blood types have different antibodies and antigens, which means if you give someone the wrong type, the immune system will attack itself, which is generally a bad thing. This guy's blood, though, it kept changing its expressed antibodies and antigens. I mixed it with other samples we had in the lab, but whether the blood was I, B, or O, no immune response was produced. This man had a blood type that adapted to the blood around it. I had a great track record in blood bank from then on as a med tech. Anytime we had a trauma, I always had the correct type of blood ready to go. Nobody used the bottom drawer in the cooler, so I kept a small supply of the blood, which I called Type C, down there. Sometimes I dilute it with extra blood, or even expired blood, but it always retained its same immune properties, no matter how diluted the original sample got. Every patient we had recovered with no complications, even faster than an ordinary person would. I was a hero, and I didn't have to prove why. Of course, good things don't last forever, and in the end, we all get caught. There was a series of gruesome murders, mostly in the cities around our hospital. Victims were found with slashed throats and wrists, with bite marks around the cuts. Not completely drained of blood, but the implication was that the killer had drunk from them. The investigators learned that the killers, who all eventually got caught roaming the streets, had all had a trauma recently, which led them to learn they all had a blood transfusion recently, which led them to our hospital, which led them to my name, which was listed in our blood bank for every single one of the procedures. I came clean almost immediately, and even though I was absolutely fired and in trouble with the law, they let me help investigate Type C. Turns out, Type C blood can always adapt to a new host, as long as it has a different blood type to feed on and transform. The patients were fine for a time, but after a while, Type C converted all of their blood and needed new, fresh blood to corrupt, hence the feeding. The next problem was that all of the victims' bodies had vanished from the morgue. A decent amount of mortician bodies found dead in the same way. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, I suppose. I accidentally started a vampire outbreak. My bad, guys. What's inside of the box wants out. It has been itching and scratching at its prison. Granny and Pap told me when I got here that some of their leghorn chickens were found mangled, dismantled, and mutilated by some carnivorous creature. I knew when Pap called, it was serious, but I didn't know it would be so dreadful. Pap woke up around 5:15 a.m. with the sun. He's an early riser, caring for the chickens and cows every day for 33 years. He showered, then dressed in his usual attire, had 2 cups of black coffee, ate 3 fresh dippy eggs with 2 slices of rye toast, setting out to the barn to retrieve his chicken feed. Pap said before he even opened the chicken coop, the metallic odor of blood was emanating from their den. As soon as he opened the door, he was sick. He bent over and reached out all the coffee, eggs, and bread at the sight before him. The throats of each animal were torn open at their necks, as if something gnawed into them with fangs, or brutalized them with vicious claws. Granny said when she heard Pap scream, she awoke quickly, draped herself in her nearby nightgown, found her boots, and ran out the door. He tried to keep her from seeing the savage murder of her adored chickens, but he was still hunched over, spewing up black coffee before he could stop her. He caught her limp, cold body as she fainted at the repugnant odor of hot, sticky blood and entrails. By the time I arrived, he'd been up several nights waiting in the fields with his Winchester SXB 12 gauge. It didn't come back for 5 nights, but when it did, Pap was asleep on an empty milk crate with his gun in one hand and a bottle of moonshine in the other. The creature had come quietly and moved with an incredibly abnormal speed. As Pap's eyes jerked open, his bottle fell from his hand as the hound had just begun its draining ritual again. He fired 1 shot, missed, and sent 4 chickens flying in distress. The creature could be described as a hound from hell, feeding upon our chickens in the most grotesque and repulsive way. He reloaded his shotgun and fired 1 more. Before the demon dog could slink away, he landed a shot in the creature's hind leg, shattering it with the blow. Pap hastily slammed the crate over the damaged beast as Granny and I ran to his side, helping him secure the metal cage. It's been yowling and screeching for days. Granny and Pap stuffed it in the basement with 2 locks on its cage and 1 on the cellar door. What's inside of the box wants out, but I've been too scared to go down there and see if I am brave enough to dare to silence the cackling vampire coyote's wails for more blood. Patrick Olber's claim he was a vampire, even at 11 years old, it's absolute nonsense. But because you're 11 you encourage this, a paradox brought on by children being the right sort of smart, but the wrong sort of wise. He preferred the nickname Caligo, which he said was Latin for vampire. It earned him a lot of school insults. Obviously, he never hurt anybody. He'd bare his fangs when threatened, but said he got all the blood he needed from the meat he ate. For months, he wore the same Ozzy Osbourne shirt, which was the darkest piece of clothing he had. It was borrowed from his older sister Heather, and was lucky enough for his natural black hair and blue eyes to mesh with the look he was going for. Patrick did well in school, stating that all the best vampires were well educated. He was okay to hang around with. You just had to get used to his eccentricities and constant references to his lifestyle. He told everybody he met he was unashamed and proud of it. After getting his own computer, he ended up writing on the internet and joining forums. The expansive escapism the web provides. He never dropped this, even as he became a teenager. Patrick Olbers was a vampire. Patrick died when he was 17. A heart attack, his mother said. An undiagnosed condition. His father whispered sadly to parents, who asked, "I don't talk about it." His sister would angrily snap for the next few months. We were devastated to have lost a friend, so young, at an age where death is not a thing you experience, but is trapped in the film reels of movies and the virtual prison of video games. I went back home last week. For the first time in 20 years, family event. At a gas station on the way into town, I was stopped by an older man in an aisle. Officer Martin, known for being a friendly, older and more lenient cop in our small town. He'd retired, but asked if I was little Pete Smith, he remembered. And when I nodded and smiled, we got to talking for a few minutes. He asked what happened to our little group, and I told him what had become of everybody else, and joked how we'd all managed to escape. Except Patrick, I guess, I added solemnly. Disgusting what happened, he whispered. The heart attack, I asked. What? No. Don't you know? He asked back. Only what our parents said, I replied. Officer Martin told me that Patrick had been found dead in his room, 2 puncture wounds in his throat, neck broken, and a note in Latin next to his body. He told me the department and family never knew what it meant, and with no evidence or DNA, it was closed as a random act of violence in a small town. I asked him if they translated the note. We did, he said. What did it say? I asked. It just said no, you're not. I was halfway to the front door when I felt the barrel of a pistol press into my side. Get back in the car, a menacing voice breathed into my ear. Make a sound, and you'll be dead before anyone can reach you. The pizza box in my hands suddenly felt as heavy as lead. Please don't do this, I whispered shakily. Just take the keys out of my pocket and go. Instead, the man dug the gun so sharply into my ribs that I nearly gasped in pain. I turned and walked to the car as he followed closely and threatened to put a bullet in my brain if I tried to run. By the time I climbed into the driver's seat, my pizzeria uniform had grown damp with cold sweat. For the next half hour, I drove at gunpoint. My boss called me over and over again, right up until the man threw my still ringing phone out the window. Do you believe in fate? He asked, but I was too afraid of saying the wrong thing to answer. Well, I do now. He continued, undeterred by my silence, and flashed a smile that frightened me. You walked into my life at just the perfect time. I thought about telling him that this was supposed to be my final night on a lousy job, that it made every shift feel like an eternity, and that I wanted nothing more than to go home and crawl into bed and never so much as look at a slice of pizza again. But I knew I would only make him angry, so I kept my mouth shut and gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Finally, he commanded me to pull up to a secluded cluster of homes, where the man pointed towards a gray house with an empty driveway and grinned wickedly. We're gonna wait for them to come home, then you're gonna take that pizza box and knock on the door. When they open it and tell you they didn't order anything, I'll charge on it. Are you gonna hurt anyone? I asked warily. He narrowed his eyes dangerously, and my heart skipped a beat. Just do what I say, he replied callously, and then you can leave. But I didn't believe him. Time passed. The scent of tomato sauce and garlic hung heavily in the car's tense air. I'm starving, he said, and reached for the pizza box. He'd consumed 2 slices and was working on a third when I saw confusion flicker in his eyes. The gun slid from his grasp, and he began to frantically claw at his throat, gasping desperately for air. Foam bubbled on his lips as he wheezed and convulsed. I watched as his accusatory glare faded away into a pale, lifeless blue. And just before my captor died, I spoke the last words he ever heard. It wasn't meant for you. I met Jeff at a bar. He was the second guy to hit on me that night, but the first one had a wife and kids. People who would kick up a fuss. Jeff lived alone. I could just tell. We had a few drinks, and then he invited me back to his place. About bloody time. On the way out the door, the guy I knocked back gave us this look, like he couldn't believe it. His expression screamed, "You picked that guy over me." In the cramped cab, I had to crack open all the windows, otherwise I'd have lost my damn mind. Jeff ushered me into a crappy first-floor apartment. Judging by the condition of the bathroom, it hadn't been cleaned in months, possibly ever. My phone pulsed in my handbag. There were 2 missed calls from my husband. Jeff and I sat down on the sofa. Then I said, "Take your shirt off." He tried to but was fumbling around, nervous. Poor lamb. I ripped the buttons open. Jeff's hairy stomach flopped over his belt, which I quickly unbuckled. He grabbed my shoulders and said, "Oh, shouldn't we go into the bedroom?" I bit my bottom lip, growing impatient. "Sure," I said, as he hopped around on one foot, attempting to wrestle off his sock. I pushed him onto the bed. Then I gently placed a finger against his lips and said, "Lie back, be quiet, and close your eyes." "Is this a game?" he asked. "Sure," I replied. Now the anticipation was so bad, I couldn't stand it any longer. As I caressed Jeff's chest and kissed his neck, he said, "Oh shit, I almost forgot to." To hell with this, I thought. I'd be there all night, the way things were going. My fangs descended, and then, for a brief moment, confusion crossed Jeff's face. It was short-lived. I tore open his carotid artery. He gurgled and tried to escape, but I pinned him down, his juicy blood hitting my tongue in waves. It was warm and nourishing, and there was plenty of it. Jeff opened and closed his fists, staring up at the ceiling, his eyes turning the color of pale egg whites. By the time I'd finished feeding, my entire jar was stained dark red. I licked my lips, then went into the bathroom to wash up. A message came through from my husband as I toweled my hands. "Presentation went great, honey. Me and Richard took the clients out for dinner. Now we're back at the hotel. Tried to reach you, but couldn't get through. I'll call first thing tomorrow. Love you." He's such a sweetheart. Content, I packed my things and departed. It had been touch and go for a few weeks. The hungrier I got, the tastier my husband looked, and it was impossible to nip out for a decent meal when he was close by. But after a healthy portion of Jeff, I wouldn't need to feed again, until Easter. Ever since COVID started, my parents have been taking the precautions way too serious. I get it at first, when nobody knew how deadly the virus could be, but it's been months now, and they haven't taken off their masks in the house. They won't even talk to me, for fear that they'll spread the virus to me, so they just send text messages. They didn't think it was safe for my 19-year-old brother to live in the same house, so they texted me that they paid for him to go to Florida. The odd part is that he hasn't returned any of my texts that I have sent him. My school is still virtual and my parents prefer that I don't leave the house. Every morning, when I wake up, I feel like I have a hangover, but I haven't drank alcohol in months. I just feel so alone, and my parents have been acting extremely weird lately since COVID. None of my extended family or friends are allowed over the house. Both of my parents said that they have developed a light sensitivity from probably contracting COVID months ago, so I never see them with their sunglasses off. In the past, I could always gauge who was walking up the stairs by the difference in gaits that both of my parents had. However, both of their footsteps sound completely different now. My dad, who was a Gulf War veteran, was a staunch Republican. But I'll go downstairs now and he'll be watching some left-leaning news broadcast. My mom's hair is still blonde, but the shade of blonde she wears now kind of looks more trashy, almost like she took a bottle of bleach and just doused her hair in it. I'm starting to get really weirded out by them, that I started to lock my bedroom door at night. But I think one or both of them have a key or are getting into my room by some other means. I purposely place stuff on my floor in a certain direction, and when I wake up, some of the things on the floor have moved. I really want to run from the house, but my parents have made me terrified of contracting the disease. They told me I have a heart condition, which I wasn't aware that I had up until a few months from now. I tried to jokingly remove the mask from my mother's face, but the N95 mask she wears is difficult to get off, and she didn't find it the least bit amusing, where she made a motion that she was going to hit me. I'm constantly freezing in the house, as they either don't turn on the heat high enough during the winter time, and they crank up the air conditioner now during the summer. They text me that I should wear hooded sweatshirts like they do in the house. Last week, I noticed traces of blood on my pillow, and when I went to look in my makeup mirror, I noticed that I had 2 circular round marks on my neck, about 3 inches apart, where it looked like something had bit me. Reunion. The message was just that single word, but I instantly recognized the address, Jonasburg. Former bassist for a high school garage band, Vampire Death Squad. The last I'd heard was that he was moving somewhere overseas. Seeing his message sure brought back a flood of memories. The first day, I met Jonas and his bandmates, Karina, and while I was impressed with 2 things: his shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, and his super cool car, a fire-red Corvette. It was way too nice for a high school student, but I didn't question it too much. Jonas and his friends didn't go to my school, though I don't know which other one they could have attended, as choices were limited in our area. We didn't talk about school much, to be fair. When we were together, it was all about the music. When I joined the band, it was Jonas on bass, while on lead guitar, and Karina played keyboard. They were looking for a drummer, and that's where I fit in. I also provided the location, my garage. Much to my parents' chagrin, we spent endless nights and weekends thrashing it out in that place. It was a sweat-dripping, hair-flipping good time. Then, late in the evening, even though I would be plain worn out from our jam session, they would drive off, freshly energized, to have some fun. It definitely worried me, with all the murders and disappearances that were taking place in our area, that they might be in danger, but they didn't seem concerned. As for the email, I replied enthusiastically, "Yes. Sounds great. Just let me know when and where." When and where was downtown Atlanta, 3 weeks later. We met outside a techno-metal club. I recognized Jonas' hair and studded black leather jacket from a block away. "Jonas," I called out. He turned to face me, and my breath instantly cut in my throat. The guy looked like he hadn't aged a day. Then I saw Karina, and while standing beside him, it was the same with them. We were all in our 40s at this point, and they still looked like teenagers. "Hey, Matt," Jonas said with a wide grin, seeming to relish my shocked expression. "Glad you joined us. We're gonna have some fun tonight. You in?" Suddenly gripped with unshakably bad feelings, I shook my head slowly, stepped back, then turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, slamming into several other passersby. It all made sense now. The blood drained, mutilated bodies police had found all over our county. The fact that I never saw them eat or drink a single thing the entire time I'd known them. Since that brief meeting, I haven't heard from Jonas or the others. I couldn't tell you where they are right now. When I saw the news about the violent club massacre that took place that night, I felt numb. But I was mostly wondering why they never went after me. This storytelling is soon over, and I hope you all had a great time. But before I go, I just wanted to drop a quick note and let everyone know that I have the world's best wife. Her exceeding brilliance is only surpassed by her exquisite and matchless beauty. I am truly a lucky man and undeserving of such a goddess as she. When we first met as college freshmen over 20 years ago, I was a scrawny, acne-ridden dork, while she was a curvaceous, stunning fox. Why she ever fell for me in the first place, I will never understand. When I asked her to marry me a couple years later, I was almost surprised that she said yes. I'm so grateful for every day we've been able to spend together, as she fills my days and nights with an excitement only she can bring. Over the past 2 decades, my wife has blessed me with a pair of award-winning children, each of whom thankfully got the best traits of their mother. I'm happy to spend my evenings waiting hand and foot on the lot of them after returning home from a long day at work. I know I might look depressed, or possibly even frightened, when you see me in public hauling around their baggage. But please know that I'm not. I love my wife and kids more than anything else, and it is my undying pleasure to do so. Finally, when I wake up and read this note, I will be filled with thankfulness that for over 7,600 days, my wife has repressed, hourly, a nearly overwhelming urge to sink her razor-sharp teeth into my carotid arteries and feed off of my heart, bubbling lifeblood. And she has helped our children to do the same. I also will not be the slightest bit upset about the loss of my best friend and his lovely family, as they had something my family required. I understand that sacrifices must sometimes be made, and no one's life is more important than that of my wife and kids. Above all else, and no matter what happens, I will remember that I love my wife, and she is truly the best wife ever. So to anyone who is listening, thank you, and good night.
Please subscribe, or the toxic skull will come for you.